upper outer, both of those kinds of things can be there. We also get kinds of things like often simply narcissism, sort of a feeling, so the child sense that the whole world's supposed to rotate around you, to be the center of everybody's attention. Another thing that sometimes happens there is mania. It's almost like the visions can possess the person, and so there can be a kind of manic quality in an early upper outer person as well. Early lower outer, depression, not uncommon. Often kind of fall into depression from an upper pole place too. Another piece that's significant there is that this kind of personality style can often feel fairly estranged within the culture, simply because the kind of sensibilities it has are not that recognized and appreciated within modern culture. So if it feels very estranged, that can take almost a kind of morbid quality, and it can turn almost into kind of sociopathic quality as well. So you can get kind of a Charles Manson kind of personality out of it. Early lower inner, certainly the most common one there is simply withdrawal, and often withdrawal with depression. And also passive dependency is another kind of symptom that we sometimes see there. But the withdrawal depression, usually what I call a kind of wet depression, like a sense of being mired in the waters of things. Okay, how about body? How do we experience this kind of person bodily? One thing we certainly experience is that they tend to look young for their age. They tend to have youthful features and often youthful gestures along with that. And it also includes how you experience their skin quality. It tends to also seem youthful. Tend to be very flexible in their joints. Tend to be hyperflexible, like young children are. Okay. If you go back to this time in the evolution of culture, this is a time where a body discipline like Hatha Yoga would have significant appeal. We could look at a wonderful body being a body that could turn itself into a pretzel. Okay, very different notion of a beautiful body. Okay, and there's a similar kind of flexibility that's a part of the beauty of body within early axis. Upper pole, another interesting phenomena is that early axis upper folk tend to be quite tall, tend to be thin and willowy, and taller than other members of their family, for example. I think the reason for that is that they simply tend to have longer childhood. There's a delayed adolescence, so that there's a delayed fusing of the skeletal growth plates that stop the growth process. So you get a person who's very thin and flexible. Within early lower, you can, especially if it's quite outer, get some of that hyperflexibility, again, and fairly thin. But what one tends to get is a movement from the thin child to the sort of chubby child in early lower. See that some outer, as we move more inner, there's a couple of things that happen bodily. You can move from just the chubby child to often fairly significant obesity, okay, within early lower, or interestingly, counterposed to that, one can get a very different phenomenon and get somebody who's very, very thin and small and waif-like. And it's like the hungry child. The interesting thing is, if you talk to most people who have an early lower kind of obesity, you talk to them and they say, I have a small hungry child inside of me. Okay. So, so within the early upper, we have a body that's defined around that place held very close to core within the height of oneself. Within the early lower, we get a body defined around a much more diffuse, open, energetic, largely in the lower part of the body. Okay. correlates with other kinds of diagnostic systems. Probably the best one is the Jungian notion of the puera aeternis. People are familiar with that, it's sort of the eternal child. Jungians do a great deal, talk very well about early access personalities, largely because Jung had an early access personality. Freudians do absolutely terrible at it. They don't hardly know they exist. Other kinds of diagnostic terms that can sometimes be narcissistic personality, paranoid personality, passive-dependent personality, depressive personality. Notice that when you're talking in traditional nosological terms, we're normally talking in pathology kinds of concepts, but those are ones that can be related to early access. Schizoid. Great. Any other? Okay, well there's a very quick trip through early access. Just for fun, take a minute or so to be an early access person. Many of you may already be. May not have to stretch very far. But take a little time to walk around the room as an early access person. If your basic personality structure is early and you're largely early upper, play with being early lower. Or early lower, try being early upper, and playing around with the different parts of it. Notice how you feel in yourself from that place. Notice how the room seems. Notice how other people seem. Notice what's important to you from that place. Just take a minute or so and let's see what happens. Okay, and then take a moment just to drop into yourself and be aware of what were the qualities that you felt like from there. What were the things that were important to you? What the world looked like from there? What was exciting from there? What was scary from there? What would be easy to do from there? What would be very difficult to do from there? What would people who are different than you look like from there? How would you respond to them? Share briefly. Any responses? Things that you noticed that were interesting?
I'm amazed at how important the inner and outer dimension seems, because I was hiding behind the post and peering around at everybody and being my early lower inner self. And here's my early lower outer buddies mushing around on the floor. I felt like they were another species, and we're early lower together, but the inner was so, I mean, it just didn't feel like we were the same energetic. And then when you suggested that we feel into our spirituality, I just did like an early upper inner version of that and stayed in. It was just real striking to me how, even though one could be early with people, that dimension is really divides in a way.
That's right. That's right.
That was very surprising.
Great. Important, for simplicity's sake, we're just going early, middle, late. But the differences between early lower inner and early lower outer, if it's marked in the personality style, are profoundly different personality structures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All of them are. When you think about it, we're only talking about a division into 12 parts within, with 4 directions within each axis. So it's not highly delineated. Other things, nice awareness. Notice also, a piece with that is to notice how boundaryless you were from that inner lower place. That even just the amount of impact that came from the playfulness of early lower outer felt like a threat, needed as opposed to be there. Okay. Can tell you a lot of how, if you're working with somebody who has a lot of early lower inner, the kinds of things are going to be important to be able to help the person validate in themselves and not put themselves down for, and begin to structure their life in such a way that they can live in a way that honors themselves while they're growing some of the edges that they can grow. But that kind of person is never going to be someone who's going to let life, let go, hit them like water off a duck's back, and that's just not who that person's ever going to be. So how do you help a person create a world that honors the richness that can be brought to the whole from that play? Anyway, a couple of pieces here.
Well, I was struck by how easy it was to get playful when there was somebody else to play with. It's like, at home, it reminds me of being with my kids when they were little. And when you asked what is situations are difficult, I think, it's the situations that I guess are typical of our culture in the organizational world and working in that world, which seems, in one sense, very difficult for me to do, and in another sense, very easy. But that's another story. Something like that other world out there, the world of business and foreign organizations and cities and
from this
power,
place, it seems like another world,
yeah,
doesn't it?
right. And
That's
like
right.
It is another world. From this place, it's like your parents somewhere's way up there.
Yeah, because when we could play, the world could just be play.
Right.
But I had a sense that if for some reason I had to have a juxtaposition with someone who was critical of play,
Yeah.
then I would have probably been where Susan was,
Right.
which was suddenly it wouldn't have been right to be playing on. I would have had to hide that particular aspect. Whereas
Yeah.
here it was just play, and that was allowed.
I was really aware of my heart and how kind of vulnerable I was being, and very quickly looked around the room to see if there was anybody I could be safe with. And you guys were just so much in that kind of playful place. It was so obvious that I felt like I could be safe with you. Not that I couldn't be safe with everybody else in the room, but that was just so quickly apparent. That issue of safety was a real important one for me in working in that.
Beautifully put. If you were to talk about a primary issue that exists within early access, it would be the polarity between existence and annihilation. Okay. And like when you get into middle access, you're dealing with control questions, or late access, more achievement and visibility questions. It's very hard for a middle access person or a late access person to understand that a conflict to an early access person might feel like a question of existence, not control. And it has a very different quality of feel to it. It's very important to be able to acknowledge that, and you can see where paranoia comes from. The middle access person might just lose control, which is very hard for the middle access person. But that's a different thing than ceasing to exist. Okay, so the middle access person doesn't get paranoid; they get scared and tough. But that's it.
I was trying to be early upper inner, and I don't know if I did that, but what I experienced was maybe even more separation than you did as early lower inner, in that when the kids were playing, as it were, I didn't. I wanted to remove myself from where they were and didn't even really have much comprehension of what they were doing. It's not like I was early lower inner wanting to, kind of feeling apart for them and wanting to be with them, or feeling my separateness from them. It's like I didn't even comprehend that there was a potential relatedness between us. It's like I didn't understand what was going on. And what was present for me was, when I was composing in my head, or what I was trying to sort of create, or that was what was reality to me. And it was very much putting me apart from just about anything else going on.
Nice, interesting, beautifully put. Realize that if you get very ascendant in early access, you really get into a very ascetic kind of place, where the early lower is a distasteful kind of reality. It isn't evil like it becomes in middle access. Okay, but there is a desire very much to move into kind of a pure order and away from the chaos of the underworld.
And really not wanting to disrupt whatever it was I was experiencing as peacefulness or whatever, or as contentment, or inside myself.
Nicely put.
Thank you.
Okay, well, why don't we move on. In order to do this, I'm not going to be able to help you very much. So I'm going to say my partings. And what I'm going to do is invite a brother of mine to come in. And my brother. Well, I don't think I'll say anything about him. I'll just let you judge for yourself. So anyway, I'll leave, and it's been nice spending time with you. Whoops.
No means leave a slide behind.
Wayward slugs. Well, Charlie asked me to come and talk to you folks about middle axis stuff. See, my little brother was here. Leaves a mess. All right. Well, enough of that, that prissy spiritual creative stuff. We're moving to middle axis. And as middle axis in any formative process, we move past that inspirational beginning kind of place. Often we move past it in a way that's a bit of a shock to us to discover that there's indeed significantly more than that in the world. We're not often grateful sometimes that happens. But to the degree we're able to take on those kinds of challenges, we learn some important kinds of abilities of moving from the inspiration stage into the perspiration stage of that in reality. And with that come very important kinds of capacities. An understanding of perseverance, understanding really of a whole new meaning of courage, an understanding of what it means to have self-control, delay gratification. It also is a place that takes us out of the pre-personal and into the personal. So this is a part in us that has a valuing of simple human relationship with other simple human people. Okay? Basic values, very simple, concrete things, are very important in this place. They're what's true. Okay? The rest of it's fluff. So, let's make our way around the different facets of middle axis personality. Let's start again the inner upper aspect. And again, this is the aspect that's closest in and most in the light. And in its own way, it's spiritual, but here we would talk about not as spiritual, we talk about as religious. Okay. So this is the personality style which you would most commonly find with somebody who is a priest, for example, a fundamentalist minister. So, bless you, my children. It's also a very common personality style for teachers. Because this is a personality style that's really concerned about control, about management within an inner emotional sphere. Okay, and within middle axis religion, that's control and management in terms of in terms of one's personal passions and emotions. And for a teacher, that's much of the task in traditional education, has to do with somehow keeping management over 25 to 30 rambunctious pubescent sorts in the room, which takes that same kind of capacity to not only keep some control over that, but actually find that a fulfilling endeavor to do, somehow creative and meaningful to be involved in that endeavor. Very hard to comprehend from either an early access place or a late access place. Okay? But they're highly committed people who do immensely wonderful things in that place. Okay. If we move from middle upper inner to middle upper outer, that kind of control that before had to do with more the inner emotional domain shifts out into the world. And this is the place where we get people who are really good managers of people. Okay, now that can be in a business kind of situation. For example, a sort of patriarch of the family business kind of person is likely to have a middle upper outer kind of personality. Also, probably the most common personality style in politicians. At least you have to have a significant amount of it. You have to have some of it in order to be a decent politician. That's sort of an archetype of middle upper outer is somebody like Maggie Thatcher. Right? Tough as nails and knows how to get the job done. No nonsense. Okay. Other kind, somebody like coach of a football team. Okay. Head of a union. Going to be middle upper outer kind of folk. They're in the world of people. I mean, their management has not to do with abstract ideas or finance as much as it has to do with managing people, okay, and understanding control dynamics and knowing how to play the politics of things between people, okay. Early access or late access folk just, can't hold a candle to them in that dimension and can't even understand how to play the game. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, if we then move from middle upper outer to middle lower outer, we get someone who, in a similar way, has that capacity for hard work and endurance, getting a job done, except now, rather than being the manager, it's the person in the trenches. The person who's doing the work. Okay? So this is your most common personality style for someone who we would call like a blue-collar worker. I mean, somebody who's working in the factory, somebody who's working in the office, in a secretarial kind of job, but commonly for the civil personality styles. Somebody who is a cowboy, cowgirl. Okay? You're out there working long days, tough work, dirty work, okay, and getting the job done. Those important qualities here, the quality of perseverance. There's also a profound quality of loyalty that goes along with this. I mean, there's, you might think of middle upper as the moral stage, but there's a kind of code of honor that's a part of middle lower outer. It's sort of the. This is where the best soldiers work from. You follow orders and you don't let your buddies down, no matter what. If we move middle, lower inner, we get those same qualities of constancy, of perseverance, of toughness, really, but now it is brought much less from out into the world, increasingly brought into the home. Okay? So this is a personality style, again, of people who often make wonderful parents, and but it's the kind of tough parent who can handle 7 or 8 kids, family, all growing up at the same time, all different ages. Okay, keep control over the whole thing. Okay. Warmth of heart, like everything, doesn't always show it, but it's always there. Roots that are so deep it never disturb them for anything. Okay. So in the home, also sometimes there's a farming community quality around it. Values of home and community. This is heartland stuff. Okay. Hearth and home. My archetypal image for middle, lower, inner is sort of the peasant farm woman taking the fresh loaf of bread out of the oven and setting it on the table, making no big deal about it. But there it is, the heart of life. Right there. So that's middle. So qualities there. One of the richnesses, basic values. Okay, loyalty, ability to do hard work, high valuing of hard work. Ability to take control and get the job done. The commitment to family, commitment to community, commitment to another person for just being another person. You don't have to be anything to be loved in middle axis. You don't have to achieve anything. You don't have to create anything. You just have to be you. How about some of the partialities of middle axis? Well, certainly one is middle axis folk have a difficult time frequently with softer sensibilities, difficult time with early axis sensibilities, difficult time often with middle lower sensibilities that are softer. So out of that, there's often significant sexism, racism as a part of the moralism of middle axis. And middle axis people tend to see things in fairly black and white terms. It's like the upper lower pole, the inner outer pole are in isometric tension. And they're equal balance and set opposite to each other within this personality style. So things tend to be pretty black and white and pretty concrete. Okay. To seen from early or late axis eyes, middle axis people are often seen crude. And that being simply a function of the middle axis person doesn't have either the sort of magical, playful numinosity of the early axis person, nor do they have the sort of sophistication and ability to deal with appearance and detail and such as that the late axis person has. The middle axis person can be limited in that way, and it actually is a very important piece in working with the middle axis person, because often the middle axis person feels defensive and inadequate because our culture puts such high value on pizzazz and intellect, and the middle axis person isn't that quick, and there's going to be incredible power that can come from validating that as not an inadequacy, not as something wrong, but an expression of the way that particular person organizes experience. Okay, like I'm aware in terms of the kinds of ideas of the theory that many middle axis folks stay away because they don't feel like they're smart enough to get it. But the middle axis folk who can come and hang out with it will stick with it over months until they're the ones who really have it. Okay? And they may not have the facility of talking it. Okay? But in terms of their ability to use it as a therapist, okay, in terms of their ability to just hang out tenaciously with it, even when pieces of it scare them and they don't get it, they're the folks you can count on. Could be there in the end. So I'm aware in myself of that often not being the most interesting people when you first meet middle axis people, that in terms of my friendships that endure over time, a large portion of them are middle axis friendships. I've come to deeply treasure what comes out of middle axis things. other kinds of partialities in middle axis. A real common one is that middle axis folk, if middle axis folk have a real tendency to get caught in struggle a lot. And if there's a credo for late axis, it's I think, therefore I am. If there's a credo for middle axis, it's I struggle, therefore I am. And it's hard for middle axis folk not to struggle about things. So it's hard for them. Like it's very, for a part of that. It's very hard for middle axis upper, especially, to just let go and have a good time. Just hang loose with things. There's a tension around things all the time. It's hard not to be concerned about control in some kind of way from a middle axis place. Okay, kinds of symptoms from a middle upper inner place. That kind of ethical quality and concern with control can easily become moralizing, preaching, and in a very condemning kind of way. Also, when it's significantly split off, it can often be almost laughingly hypocritical. It's because the middle axis upper pole person, if they're very split off, will preach profound truths about how people should act, but they're not connected enough in their lower pole to even know what their lower pole's doing. So it's sort of like, do you know what your lower pole's doing this evening? You know where it is. So like, where are your children this evening? So you run into the classic kind of thing, like with all the evangelists these days. One after the other is with some prostitute somewhere after preaching in church about how that's the ultimate sin the day before. And